Hey everyone, Madilynn here, the chapter goddess. I am a mom, author, blogger, freelancer, podcaster, producer, and overall creative. With this show, I really want to focus on creatives and bring their authentic self to life. How are they motivated to pursue their passions? What have been the struggles along the way? Does self-care play an important role in who they are today and how they connect with the creative flow? Bringing one's authentic self to the forefront is important in this world that we live in currently. Sharing your self-care, your tips, and how you stay on track for things without losing it completely is also important. Self-care is not talked about enough, and authenticity and self-care are what I like to highlight with my creatives, as well as getting to know them. So get ready for a fun and entertaining show. Hit the like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get ready to meet this episode's guest. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Chapter Goddess. I have a fantastic guest for you guys to meet today, and this is going to be a fun chat. So let me bring them in and let them introduce themselves.
Hi, my name is J.R. Konkol, and I write the Rebirth of the Fallen series.
Awesome. So I have another question for you about your creative side. So we did the written interview. So you're also a professional pianist. Is that correct?
I wouldn't say professional.
Yeah.
I'm clearly an amateur I've played for about 43 years now. So at this point, sunken cost fallacy, you just can't give up.
Yeah. I played the piano some when I was younger. So it kind of makes me excited that that's something that you still get to do. Anyway, sorry.
No, it's neat. There's a lot of adult pianists in this area. So we actually have like our own version of AA, our support group. The local Steinway Center lets us all get together once a month and try out our repertoire. And it's like, the first time you show up, you don't have to play, but you have to introduce yourself. And it's about the same thing. It really is.
That is so awesome. So let's talk about your book, and then we'll come back to the piano thing because I'm curious about a couple things.
Sure.
But tell me more about your book.
Well, it's a series. There's 4 of them now. The 5th one will be out in August.
Ooh, congratulations.
Thanks. And it's interesting because it's kind of a post-apocalyptic fantasy. The readers they kind of get dropped into a world that has fallen. It fell 3 centuries ago. Mm-hmm. So it's got a nice grimdark feel to it, but your protagonists are young adults. So you do have kind of like a little bit of a Harry Potter wandering through, not a George R.R. Martin world, not that dark, but, lethal and dark, but more of a high fantasy, epic fantasy sort of feel with a lot of cinematic action. I like R.A. Salvatore stuff. If you're familiar, your readers are familiar. I really like that style of fast action.
Yeah, that'll keep them interested for sure. So where did this idea for the story come from?
Well, role-playing games. So I grew up in the 80s and late 80s playing Dungeons and Dragons. And, not understanding that it was a story. I think when you're a kid, you're rolling dice and like playing with lawyers. Sorry, the cat is complaining in the background.
Oh, you're gonna actually thought it was my cat.
No, he wants his catnip. But we didn't think of it as a story. And then the Dragonlance novels came out. And one of the famous things about that series was that a lot of the scenes were played out at a gaming table. And it kind of, turns the light on. You think, hey, wait, this is more than just rolling dice and, keeping track of numbers on paper and stuff. This is a collaborative story.
Yeah.
So fast forward, I had built my own game system, done Gen Con and tried to release it and all of that. And, we had a group of people we were playing, and that's what every couple of years we'd play a campaign. And at one point I gathered and said, we're going to play out a novel. This was 2004. And for like 6 years we played out this long series of games. They're probably 100 sessions or so. And that's how this series of novels was born.
Oh, that is so awesome. So you got to basically interact, like live the story through D&D.
Yeah, different game system, but same thing. Yeah. And even as much as like a lot of the main characters, I mean, they were all players at a table. A lot of the things that they brought to those characters certainly made it into, the story. And it could have gone, a lot differently. I mean, we have two of the characters are brothers, and the mother died during childbirth of the younger one. And they played up that entire dynamic and had this whole sibling rivalry going through, the entire story. And it was great. It was great. And it's really made it into the books. There's a lot of elements that watching other people act these roles has really kind of given it a new life.
That is amazing. Do you think the story would not have turned out as well had you not had that kind of inspiration?
It wouldn't be as detailed. Since I played all those games, and I saved the notes. When I started writing, I went back and found the original notes for like the first 8 sessions, which had like the first 50 scenes all scheduled out. So I was able to actually refer back to them and remember all these details that I had built at the time and we had worked out at the time that 15 years later you're not going to remember them, or 12 years, whatever it was. But since I had all of that built and I had the story, a much larger arc, I know where it's going. So it does make it much easier to write because I can plot out, the whole arc a couple books in advance because I'd already tested it. I'd already played it out and already, and had let it kind of play around in my mind for all that time.
Yeah. So tell me more about your main characters.
Well, there's a family of them, basically. They become family. I mean, they start out and they're just friends. But as they're dropped into this and they start to explore this world, they very much become a family. And it does feel initially, young adult, but they grow up very, very fast. And you do play off, and it's a fantasy world, so you do have them playing traditional roles, but a little bit more than that. Because what they start experiencing is they become possessed slowly over the course of the first couple of books. And they find out that they're not the only ones, that a lot of important figures are possessed. And they start to come to find out that they're being possessed by figures from 300 years ago when the world fell, that were somehow called back. And so you get to see slices of history played back in flashbacks, and you start to have some information being provided. So inside a point of view, there's that possessed point of view as well. And you do have to deal with possession as well. Sometimes there's a really easy relationship between a character and the Aloran spirit that's come to possess them. Sometimes it's not so easy. Sometimes it's literally possession and they're trying to force them to do things that they may have wanted done in the past, want done now. So you do have a lot of that fight going on as these characters evolve, step into their roles, start to take all the roles that their parents had before them and start to deal with these figures from the past and piece together what actually happened and what's supposed to happen now. Because the world is almost fallen, but it's not completely fallen. There's something holding on and nobody knows what it is.
Yeah. So is one of them in particular your favorite that you created?
Initially, yes. And I'd say by book 3, somebody else took that role.
Ooh.
Which is fun. Very fun for me because I'm very much a plotter. But still, it's still great to be able to experience what it's like when a character takes over and says, okay, you didn't have me fully in your plot, so I've decided to clean out this section of your world and make it mine.
Yes.
Yeah, so I've got a demon who gets summoned in book 1. She doesn't even have a name in book 1. And she becomes very important in book 2. But, sacrificing, doing all the, my demons they're human in a sense. They're good and bad, they're moral, they're very gray, but they do demon things. So there's, a lot of sacrificing families, other stuff that, not so good. But, fast forward a couple of books and now she's in a city, found a purpose, and actually being the figure who's keeping the darkness at bay.
Ooh.
Because, she's made that choice. It's interesting when I can say my leading, most heroic figures are a child molesting demon and a crossdresser. in a relationship, of course. But
Yeah. So that's actually kind of a fun way to have it, honestly. And it's different than what a lot of people would expect. So it'll kind of throw them for a loop. And it also makes the story more memorable, if you ask me.
well, and it's one of the themes. And I don't like hammering people over the head with themes, but you start out and it can appear very black and white. Humanity is almost fallen. The demons are wiping them out. Okay, we've got a good and bad, right? Good and evil is set up there. But as you go along, you start to see examples that, well, the humans aren't all good. A lot of times they're pretty bad, and the demons aren't all bad. They have their own motivation. Some of them are very honorable, others aren't. And some of them start to get a spark of what you would call humanity.
Did you have one that was your least favorite?
I've got some that are more difficult to write. And I had one that I almost made like the Disney evil queen. In fact, one of my beta readers first said, this character is too flat. It's like a Disney evil queen. And I'm like, well, I need to have something as a compass, right? On one end, you got to have a compass of this is your darkest, so everything else can be more gray than that. Yeah. So for the first couple of books, every time I wrote a chapter from that point of view, I wanted to make it as despicable as possible. So I really grew to dislike her. But, over time, we're starting to see some flaws there. The character's starting to grow.
Ooh, that's good. You got to always have that one character. It kind of helps progress the story for sure.
Yeah.
So with the world building that you've got and the inspiration that you've got, what was your favorite thing when putting the world together in the book format?
I think seeing the progression and being able to look at it. I think the first book is more of, the first half of it you're writing, can I do this, right? And I think as people, and I'm sure a lot of your viewers are writers at one level or another, as you step through that journey, the first half, you just, can I do this? And you're constantly doubting yourself. And then after a while, you say, okay, I can do this. It might not be great, but I can do this. So the first book, I think I was consumed with all of those pretty natural imposter syndrome sort of things. So I didn't get to enjoy it as much.
Yeah.
Until maybe just the end when I really got to flex my wings in, some larger cinematic combats and figure out how all the point of views can be used as cameras and dramatic irony. Because, they can't see what other people know, and you can show somebody a chapter before. So you can create those sort of things. But I think maybe by the beginning of book 3, when my characters really had their footing in the world, and I felt like they belonged there, I felt that they were growing and they were all growing into their roles, and I was getting to see the world breathe and grow around them. That was kind of the big moment for me.
Speaking of the action scenes, tell us a little bit about the backstory behind how you create those action scenes. Oh,
yes.
I love you, kitty.
It's the big one. So I think anybody who's played or specifically ran Dungeons and Dragons or any other kind of fantasy role-playing game, and we can all watch it now. I mean, we can all watch Critical Role, and we see it. It's becoming a lot more popular and mainstream now. I think if you do that long enough, you develop a superpower. Because if you think about it, you're trying to describe what's going on to a group of people and keeping track of where they are at any point in time. And if you play with lawyers, they will argue everything with you at every point in time. So once you exercise that skill long enough, you start to be able to build those pictures in your head, being able to know exactly where something is in relation to something else, knowing how fast something's going to move. And you can start to really build a scene. You can picture it, very well. And you've spent so much time describing things using language as opposed to watch a movie. Using a language to describe the scene so everybody else knows. Well, that's writing. That really is writing. And so once I started figuring that part out that, okay, I have done this. It's just, I used to talk it. Now I have to put it on the page. Once I started doing that, then it became really a fun project of, okay, I've got this large battle. How do I show this? How do I give this to my readers? How can I explain the concepts where they're not mired in world building and having to know this does that and this does that? How do you make it fun? How do you make it like a Marvel movie battle, for instance? Those things are fun.
Yeah.
They're not always good, but sometimes they can be a lot of fun if you approach it that way, as opposed to, oh, I got a battle scene, I got to get myself through it.
Yeah, no, that's a terrible way to approach that for sure.
But I think we all have blind spots.
Mm-hmm.
I think every writer has a blind spot, and can you write a romantic scene? How do you do writing a dinner party? How do you do writing a battle? How do you do, we all have those blind spots. And yeah, that's just one that I really didn't think was a blind spot. And when I started to play with it, I really wanted to go in that direction and really loved doing it.
Amazing. So when you see it, do you see it kind of like a Marvel movie in your head?
Yep.
Playing out? Yes.
Yep. When it's large enough, yeah.
I've only met a few people that have actually been able to see it like that, because I'm one of those that see it too when I write my fight scenes and everything in my stories. And it's more fun.
Yeah. And it lets you get to those, assuming the battle is large enough and your world allows it, lets you get to those really, really epic, scenes. And we've had a lot of them. I mean, it's not even Marvel. Take a look at, the battle in Two Towers.
Mm-hmm.
How well that was done and how important, just even having Gandalf crest the hill with the light behind him, how that made you feel.
Yeah.
And knowing that, hey, I can do this as a writer too. I can have these moments where my readers are going to start feeling dread, and I can just have somebody create light and take away some of that dread and replay all those feelings. I mean, I think every writer is a reader and consumes this media. So, I mean, we have a lot of examples out there. It's just, how do we translate what we've seen and experienced into the page? And everybody's going to do that differently.
Yes. Now for another fun question. How does your music, your creation and creativity with music affect your writing?
In a lot of ways. So structurally, let me give you an example, because you said you played piano. So when you start any complicated art form, you learn the basics, right? You learn how to do things. You approach a piece and you're looking at the notes and you want to play all the notes. Maybe you put that down for a while. You come back to it 6 months later if you played other things and you've gotten better. Now suddenly the notes aren't that important anymore. You already know how to do that.
Yeah.
And then you start looking at the dynamic markings. And then you start figuring out, hey, I can hit the note with my pinky many different ways. And I can make that, if I work hard enough, I can make that note sound out more pronounced than everything else. Mm-hmm. And then suddenly you're working with phrasing, and you're working with polyrhythms instead of having to count them up. Cup of tea for me, cup of tea for me. When you're doing 3/2, you can just feel it. And you don't have to consciously think about it. And every time one of those things becomes automatic for you, your brain gets to focus on the next to make it better and better and better. And I think as a writer, we do that. Yeah. As we start, I still remember because I wrote multiple point of views and I made the decision to be one point of view per chapter to avoid people flopping in and out of people's heads, because I hate that. Mm-hmm. And I still remember I would do all of these statements like, well, Liam saw Connor walk towards her, and I realized I don't need the Liam saw part. That's a piece of scaffolding that I'm putting in the page for myself to keep reminding myself whose point of view it is. Yeah. And once you internalize that, you just strip that away. You don't even think about it anymore. You take it out of your writing. And then you get to the next thing, maybe you're working with dialogue and you're like, wow, this is bad. I have he said, she said after every line. How do I do this? And then, after you practice that a bit and you realize, okay, I can add actions in the middle of my dialogue. There's all these different ways I can approach it. And once those tools become second nature, you don't think about them anymore. So then you can move on to the next thing and the next thing. And as you go along, you've taken things out of your thought process so you can focus on new things. And you do that. I think you do that a lot with music. The other interesting thing with music, I think I heard this on a radio lab somewhere. So there's actually equations for minor climaxes in songs, minor moments. And you find that you can never get somebody to get that spine, shiver, that tingle at the true climax of the piece, unless you've hit the smaller ones along the way. It's like it primes the pump for the brain so that when it gets to that moment, you can really have catharsis. You do the same thing. You can do the same thing in a large battle scene. You can do the same thing in an argument, because an argument's just a battle. It's just there's no physical action.
Yeah.
You can do that all the time in your writing, and I don't think I would have thought about that or known about that, if it wasn't for music and studying that, and really doing a deep dive into some of the studies and some of the pieces I play where they analyze those moments. And again, going back to the Marvel movies, you ever walked out of a movie, you're like, I feel violated because I cried and I don't believe they earned it.
Yes.
What I mean? It's like, why do I feel choked up? Well, they're using the same formula. They figured it out.
Yeah.
They're like, well, if we do this so many times and give them these moments, there's going to be catharsis, whether or not we've earned it.
That is true. So, because especially with some of the, which one was it? I think it was Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness.
Sure.
Maybe
In the recent ones.
That one. Yeah, for sure was one of those. So the ending anyway. But we won't dive into that too much. So what is you've got how many books in this series so far? You said the fifth one?
4 currently. 5th is out August.
Is the 5th one going to be the wrap up for this one, or do you have more planned? Yeah,
the 5th one is definitely not a wrap up. I'm planned out to 12. And we'll see when I get there. There may be more, but I can easily plan out to 12. I'm maybe 20,000 words into book 6 right now, which, and they are organized into trilogies. So you do get somewhere, book 1, 2, and 3 do go somewhere, but I do write very much serial. So there's not much time between any book, and even from the end of one trilogy to the start to the next, but they're organized that way and they make sense, If somebody reads them, they'll understand what I'm saying. Now, the first 3 are kind of dealing with a couple environments, and then in 4, you're somewhere else and you're moving through that and working with those problems.
Sweet. I like series that are set up like that you can just keep going, like a binge reading session, just go through them all. So those are the best. The time gaps between a lot of authors do that. It just drives me bonkers. Does that kind of like make you go stir crazy when you come across those?
Unless there's a reason for them.
Mm-hmm.
So I do time gaps between chapters. If I, so if you look at a story, or let's say you look at a journey, I think there's a lot of fantasy series where people have pointed out they just walk a lot.
Yeah.
Some famous ones, good books too, don't get me wrong, but I like to move. If the details aren't important, it's not important that they walk for 2 hours, I'll end a chapter and start it 2 hours later.
Yeah.
And reflect back briefly on the walk if there was anything memorable, and we go forward. So if I end a book, I might move things forward a couple of weeks if I need some actions to happen or the characters to evolve in a certain way. If an author has a reason to skip a lot of time, okay, fine. Yeah. But if it's just kind of like arbitrary, I guess,
like a random 17-year gap is what I'm thinking of. So
yeah, and if it's episodic, that's one thing, but right. There are examples where I'm really not happy with it.
Yeah. I mean, that actually, I'm not going to name that series or say who that was, but that's completely put me off of that series when it was like the first 3 books and boom. Okay. Now we're 17 years later. And I'm like, what? No.
Yeah. They're 2 different stories. They become 2 completely different series.
Yeah.
In the same world. Yeah.
Insane. So tell me a little bit about your creative process. How does your schedule work? Do you have a set writing routine?
I try to. And I for a while I had a pretty set routine. But life comes at you and changes things. And that's good. Flexibility is good too. But so I like to outline out my chapters. I used to outline, 20, 30 chapters in advance. Now I'm down to doing 10, which I think is made me a better writer because it allows me to revise it's a lot. But when I had so many chapters mapped out, I was reticent to revise things because I have to be doing all this extra work. So now I'm leaving myself more room. I want to always have enough chapters mapped out where I never have that paralysis. And I think most writers get that at one point. Like, I finished this chapter, where do I go now? And then you procrastinate, you stop writing. So I do like to map it out enough where I never have that paralysis so I can finish one chapter and start the next. But I don't want to go so far where I feel, I'm constraining myself. And then as far as kind of an editing rhythm, what I like to do is I'll finish a chapter, I'll edit it, I'll print it out, I'll edit the printout. Then maybe every 100 pages or so, I will print everything out and do an edit. I find if I let it sit for long enough, maybe 6 weeks, 8 weeks, whatever it is, when I go back to it, I can edit it with a fresh set of eyes. But I think you can only do, if you don't give yourself time.
Yes. You have to pull yourself completely away and then give it a new look.
Yeah. And I find I make so many corrections. And, again, it's the same thing of, I've talked about music that way, but, I think people often experience solving a problem in their dreams. They wake up one morning and they figured out the answer to something. I think it's that way with difficult paragraphs. Okay.
As an author and a creative, I like to ask other creatives what they do for their self-care, how they keep their mental focus and everything. Do you have a certain routine or something that's a go-to for your mental health?
Yeah, mine's easy because I've got the piano. Yeah. And that's what I've always had. I think if they were to diagnose me, I'd be somewhere pretty far on a spectrum. And so that's what I always had as kind of my method of expression. And I've kept it with me. As I've, moved, I always had a piano, and now I finally have a Steinway after, years of breaking other pianos. So, that grounds me. Any morning that I get to practice is a good morning, and sometimes even if I've got to be to work at 6, I'll get up at 4 so I can have, at least some time to practice before I get on with my day.
Nice. So that helps you focus for the day then, for sure. That's wonderful, because I have to agree. Music has a magical effect on everything, I feel like. So yeah, I
can't function without it. It's a common thing if you go on writers forums. There's often a question of, do you have a playlist you listen? So I think writers are really, not just writers, that's not fair, all creatives are certainly attracted to music, I would hope. It's just, it's going to play a different role and be used in different ways depending on the person. Yeah,
I agree. Well, go ahead and tell our listeners and viewer where they can find you and your work.
Okay. Here are what the books look like. Here's one. Let's see if I can do this smoothly. There's 2. That's 4. I'm doing this out of order. Here's 3. And here's 4.
Nice.
That demon who took over and became the most popular character finally made a cover.
Yay!
Yep, she finally landed a real contract. So you can find them on Amazon. My author page is up there. There's also a digital version of the trilogy, the first 3 books. Ooh. So and really cheap. And I think I'm also Kindle Unlimited, so you can also just read it there if you'd like. You can also reach me on my website. It's jrkonkol.com. It's spelled the same way as my author's name, coincidentally. Also on Facebook under J.R. Konkol.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being on the book chat with me today.
Oh, thanks for the chat. It was fun.
I hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to get future notifications when shows come out. Also, be sure to check out my website. I have a blog featuring this creative with some other fun and interesting questions. You can also subscribe to my newsletter there to stay up to date with all things the chapter goddess in Madilynn Dale. Once again, thanks for watching and have a great rest of the day.